My name is Owen Symes, and welcome to The Copagandists, a podcast about cop shows and the people who make them. This episode, we're going to sum up the legacy of the Untouchables. Now, in order to do so, we'll first begin with a quick recap of the previous episodes, since it's been a minute since our last installment. Then we'll review Quinn Martin's specific involvement and contribution to the show, before finally turning to its long-term legacy. Now recall, Desilu, a TV production company run by husband and wife team Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, had by the end of the 1950s become a force to be reckoned with in U.S. television. They rose to considerable prominence over the course of the Eisenhower years on the back of the massive success of the sitcom I Love Lucy, where they played the lead roles. Building off of this success, they purchased the old RKO production lot and took their company public in the late 1950s, right when I Love Lucy was coming to an end. Around this time, Desi Arnaz decided to adapt the memoirs of former Treasury agent Eliot Ness. Called The Untouchables, this tale of policing the bootleggers and gangsters of the Prohibition era was quickly turned into a two-part TV movie which aired in 1959.
Westinghouse, First with the Future, presents the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Tonight's show, The Untouchables. Starring Robert Stack. Co-starring Keenan Wynn, Barbara Nichols, and Pat Crowley. With special guest star Neville Brand.
You have just seen some of the stars of The Untouchables. The true story taken from the exciting autobiography of Eliot Ness, the man who probably did most to help destroy the Al Capone empire. To tell you of this era, here is the man who lived it and who reported these events, Mr. Walter Winchell.
It is always a privilege to tell a story such as this one. You could say a good deal about Eliot Ness and the part he played in the lawless era. Fortunately, there is no need to. Mr. Ness's story speaks eloquently for itself.
After this film achieved major ratings and critical success for CBS, Desilu opted to continue producing episodes. These episodes subsequently aired on the upstart ABC network. The first season, which ran across 1960, proved one of that network's first big hits. But in addition to ratings success and critical praise, the show brought along criticism as well to both ABC and Desilu, with groups attacking the show for its depiction of Italians, its portrayal of federal officials, and its vivid use of on-screen violence. These controversies mired the show in extra-legal threats, government surveillance, boycotts, and congressional hearings, led by Senator Thomas Dodd. Most of this controversy had dissipated by 1962, after the show's producers implemented a number of amendments to their formula. Fewer Italian bad guys, less explicit violence, as little mention of the FBI as possible, that kind of thing. These changes allowed the show to continue on for 2 more seasons without nearly as much public scrutiny, an improvement in the show's political position fostered by the fizzling out of Dodd's investigative hearings. By the time these changes went into effect, however, our protagonist Quinn Martin had long since departed the show, leaving after the end of the first season. Why the early departure? The available secondary literature is not at all clear on this question. The only available monograph on the show, creatively titled The Untouchables and written back in 1998, says simply that a new producer was brought on who would, quote, fill the vacancy left by Quinn Martin, who was to leave in May 1960 to go into business for himself. This hints that Martin left of his own accord, but gives precious little detail as to why or under what circumstances. 5 years later, another book, Quinn Martin Producer, came out. It is, as of this recording, the only complete overview of Martin's whole career. Alas, it does not give a solid answer either. The book quotes producer Alan Armour, who gave 2 possibilities. Quote, depending on who you talk to, either he quit or he was fired. My guess is that Desilu fired him. The producer surmised that Martin was let go because of how much money he spent producing the show, but this is just a guess, nothing definitive. Without any secondary literature to guide us, we must see what we can find in the primary material. While doing so, we must consider three things: Quinn Martin's relationship to Desi Arnaz and Desilu Productions, the role of Robert Stack, the show's star, in the production of episodes, and how contemporary newspapers framed Martin's departure from the show. As far as Desilu was concerned, it's certainly true that Martin was spending far more money than the production company wanted, a practice that Desilu wanted to reverse going into season 2. As producer Alan Armour bluntly put it decades later, Quinn Martin, God bless him, spent money recklessly, and when I came in for season 2, Desilu told me, "You gotta be very careful about money." Director Walter Grauman, hired personally by Quinn Martin, recalled one fight that he had with Desilu's money man on set, production manager Marvin Stewart, over how to do a particular stunt. To quote the director, "One time I wanted the stuntman, Victor, to run this car into a building and knock down its support. The production man, Marvin, told him not to do it. He said it would be too expensive. Eventually, the guy came to me. I said, 'Which way do you want to do it?' He says, 'Your way.' I said, 'Then do it, and fuck him.'" Stories like this help us easily imagine the man from Desilu fuming at being overruled in this way by this director, Grauman, who again was Quinn Martin's man. Clearly then, Desilu did not see eye to eye with its executive producer when it came to costs. This made perfect sense from their perspective. They had paid out a lot of money to buy RKO's production facilities. They'd only recently become a publicly traded company, and so they were under a lot of pressure to grow profits, recoup debts, and impress shareholders. In addition to this fissure with Desilu was the personality of Robert Stack, whose behind-the-scenes power only grew in proportion to his public stardom. According to fellow actor Paul Perselli, quote, "Bob Stack had producer approval, director approval, actor approval, an almost unprecedented amount of say for the star of a TV series. And a lot of people were fired because of that. Bob would tell his agent, Bill Schifrin, that he didn't like this one or he didn't like that one, and Bill would be the hatchet man." Suffice it to say, as far as later accounts are concerned, Quinn Martin accrued a number of beefs throughout the making of the first season, which would have made his continued presence on the show difficult, to say the least. Going back to the contemporary reporting on the matter, however, indicates that this is only partly true. Journalists at the time almost universally reported on Martin's departure from the show in terms entirely lacking in drama. And these are Hollywood reporters, so they really want that drama. They want that hot gossip. So if there was something brewing under the surface, you could be guaranteed that they'd want to get their hands on it. Newspapers at the time pointed out that Martin's contract with Desilu was already set to expire in May, by which point ABC had already signed him to create new TV pilots for them, directly. Reports of this type emerged as early as April 1960. For instance, in the San Francisco Examiner, quote, "ABC TV hired Quinn Martin to sit in an office and do nothing but think up new program ideas for next season. It is his reward for developing and producing this season's unbeatable Untouchables." According to a contemporary ABC press release, Martin was to create 2 new pilots for them each year, 1 half-hour and 1 hour-long show, while also permitting the network to consult with him about other shows as well. As one write-up put it, quote, "Martin starts dreaming for ABC on June 1st, 1960. Having reviewed the contemporary reporting and the additional behind-the-scenes context provided by later recollections from cast and crew, I think we can say the following. Given Martin's disagreements with Desilu regarding cost and his possible butting up against the growing influence of Robert Stack, neither he nor Desilu had all that much interest in renewing his contract. Meanwhile, ABC was keen to replicate the success of the Untouchables, and so was looking for someone to bring them more of that kind of programming. Hearing that Martin might not be continuing with the Untouchables, the network opted to give him the chance to recreate his magic, hiring him to make pilots specifically for them. Martin would accomplish this production through a new corporate entity that he would run, QM Productions. Now, perhaps Desilu would have fired Martin instead of renewing his contract, but in the event, this did not prove necessary. Martin did not fight to stay, Desilu was not forced to make an uncomfortable decision, and both parties separated somewhat amicably. So having gone through what happened to Quinn Martin, what is the artistic legacy of this show? Well, it's one of initial quality followed by decline, both in terms of writing and production values. Partly this was a result of Quinn Martin's departure. Partly it came about as the show and its producers reacted to the controversies that enveloped them, and partly it resulted from economic realities within Desilu itself. While The Untouchable obviously had its detractors, most of this criticism focused on the show's perceived antisocial qualities, rather than the merits of its artistic achievement. Congress did not swell with complaints over the realism of the dialogue or whether a plot was too contrived for its own good, after all, but rather with rebukes of the show's sadistic violence and racism. TV critics, in fact, held the show in generally high regard, as evidenced by the glowing reviews that greeted the show's premiere and the numerous awards it received across its first 2 seasons. In 1960, for instance, it was nominated for 3 Emmys: Lead Actor, Outstanding Drama, and Outstanding Editing. And it won for editing and for Best Actor. The following year, it again received Emmy nominations for Best Drama and for Best Lead Actor, with an additional nomination for Lead Actress, although that year it did not take home any trophies. In addition to the Emmys, the show was also nominated for the Best Produced Series of 1959 by the Screen Producers Guild, the 1959 TV Directorial Award by the Directors Guild of America, and for Best Sound Edited Show of 1959 by the Motion Picture Sound Editors. The thing that most critics identified as the show's crowning achievement was its high production values, which a later scholar summarized as its use of, quote, veteran Hollywood writers and directors, relatively large production budgets, low-key lighting, complex visual compositions, frequent night-for-night shooting, and a highly assertive editing style, including a great deal of interpolated stock footage and the signature voiceover narration of Walter Winchell. When considering how high the production value of the show was relative to the context of TV at the time, we really only need to drill down to one person, A.D. Flowers, who was the special effects man for the show. He would later go on to win Academy Awards, notably for the movie Tora Tora Tora. Here's Robert Stack praising Flowers in his memoirs. Quote, "The special effects man was A.D. Flowers. He's won more awards than any actor or director in the business. We were blessed to have him for 4 years. He made the show function simply because we were the first television show to use cause and effect. We used squibs and explosives and showed the effects actually happening. The television audience could see the glasses and mirrors blowing up after seeing a guy with a machine gun. None of the other shows ever did that because it was too expensive and too time-consuming." So, due credit should be given to men like Flowers and the team of craftspeople who worked with him and in the other departments for making the show look as good as it did. But we should not overlook the role of Quinn Martin as the executive in charge for hiring the right people and fostering an environment where their creativity could shine. He got them the money to make the cool things. As an active executive producer, Martin not only got them the money and fostered this environment, but he had a direct hand in choosing those who would make and star in The Untouchables. He helped hire Robert Stack, he lobbied for retaining narrator Walter Winchell when actual episodes went into production, he hired talented day-to-day producers like Norman Rechkin and Charles Russell, and he employed directors like Walter Grauman, who himself directed nearly 20% of episodes. Grauman recalled decades later, quote, "Quinn Martin was very hands-on, instinctively correct in most areas." Fellow producer Alan Armour summed up Martin's contribution to the show as follows, quote, "Quinn was the person who made The Untouchables a success." Little wonder, then, that after Martin's departure, the show's quality began to decline. In his own analysis of the show's decline after the first 2 seasons, Robert Stack blamed a lack of unified creative direction, telling an interviewer in 1963, quote, "Well, for one thing, the good writers and directors we had in the first year outgrew us. They went to feature films or to their own series. There was no single guiding force. Although Robert Stack here focused on the importance of writers, what he's really talking about is a lack of leadership. He's talking about a lack of an effective executive producer, someone who could have taken charge of hiring writers and directors, casting actors, securing the funds necessary to enact creative decisions, of keeping the gears turning in sequence. That was what Quinn Martin brought to the table in that first season. It's no coincidence that the longer the show went without him, the worse it got. Of course, it would be overly simplistic to blame Martin's absence for the whole decline. After all, the people that succeeded him were not without talent, and most of the first season's cast and crew remained on the production, giving the show a buffer against decline. This is where outside pressure really took its toll, especially in the third and fourth seasons. In responding to the controversies of the day, The Untouchables inadvertently weakened the very things that had made its first 2 seasons so dramatically strong. Contemporary critics focused on this as the main reason for the show's decline. Right before its final episode aired, for instance, LA Times critic Hal Humphrey wrote a summary of the show's storied time on television. In addition to recalling the fights with citizens groups and federal departments, this critic observed that The Untouchables, quote, had its gory moments all right, but it was also one of the better produced series to come on TV. Because of criticism and pressure, the series became pretty wishy-washy and repetitious in its third season. Another post-mortem for the show, authored by an anonymous TV insider, summed up the show's demise in similar fashion. Quote, every program appeared to be a copy of the one from the week before. Anti-violence groups and highly organized nationality committees also hastened its end. Given the declining quality, it's little wonder that the show's finale went off without too much in the way of fireworks or fanfare. As the Chicago Tribune put it at the time, quote, there's no sadness in our viewing circle over the fact that the Untouchables are to be rubbed out after 4 years and 120 shoot-'em-ups. The Tribune's shrug is especially noteworthy because it represented the critical voice of Chicago, the city in which the Untouchables took place. Finally, in addition to Quinn Martin's departure and the watering down of the show as a result of these external controversies, we cannot discount the role of raw economics. As producer Alan Armour has noted over and over, Quinn Martin spent a fortune in the first season. This understandably frustrated Desilu, a newly public company saddled with considerable debt after the purchase of RKO's production facilities. Desilu had been happy to shell out plenty of cash when producing the attention-grabbing Scarface Mob, the pilot episode in 1959, but in the long term it wanted to recoup its losses and pay back its debt. This was difficult to do when its flagship show was so expensive, both financially and politically. Even without the political considerations, it's therefore likely that the money-conscious Desi Arnaz would have tried to rein in the producers of The Untouchables. Desilu's primary consideration was, of course, solvency, and spending more than $100,000 per episode did not a profit make, especially when later episodes could simply reuse material already filmed, could rely on more stock footage, shoot day for night, and just reduce on-screen violence. Special effects didn't come cheap after all. Now this leads us into a discussion of the commercial performance of the show. We've talked about its artistic legacy. How did it do commercially? Well, first we have to talk a little bit about ABC, the network that these episodes aired on.
This has been an ABC television network presentation.
ABC was the third-place network going into the 1960s. It had a rough go of the TV business since turning on its first broadcast station back in 1949. Although the network had been able to leverage its existing radio business to purchase its first TV stations, the company's leadership soon realized that TV broadcasting was far more expensive than had been the case in radio. Within a few short years, the company was in the red and looking for a buyer. In 1953, it commanded 355 radio affiliates, but only 14 TV ones, compared to 74 for CBS and 71 affiliates for NBC. A merger with the company UPT in 1953 saved ABC from the possibility of being swallowed up by one of its competitors. With the lowest station count, ABC concentrated on expanding in high population areas, which meant a more urbanized, often younger viewership. Early on, however, the network could not figure out how to cater to this audience, and its ratings performance throughout the 1950s reflected this. In the 1950 to 51 season, for instance, it rated only one show in the top 10, The Lone Ranger, at 7th place. Overall for the decade, ABC rated a top 10 show only 6 in 10 years. Its leadership had tried to improve the network's relative position by working more closely with major Hollywood studios, beginning with a pioneering partnership with Disney in the mid-1950s, but the fruits of these innovations were slow in coming. The Untouchables, although it did not put the network on top, did help keep the entity alive during this turbulent period. Now, when assessing the commercial performance of The Untouchables in particular, we should note right off the bat that the show only briefly achieved sustained ratings success, finishing the 1960 to 61 season at an impressive 8th place. Thereafter, it fell out of the top 30, at least for Nielsen. Nevertheless, the show did achieve an effervescent cultural brightness. Indeed, it was one of the first real cultural forces to emerge from the ABC network. Much of their early ratings success, such as it was, had come from a crop of middling westerns like The Rifleman or Cheyenne. This was a genre that was tried and true by this point, but ABC certainly wasn't the only network producing them. CBS had Gunsmoke, NBC had Wagon Train, both of which outperformed whatever ABC offered. The Untouchables, however briefly, gave ABC an edge in a genre that the other networks could not match, the gangster thriller. In addition to its early ratings performance, the show achieved considerable saturation in other areas of pop culture. To take examples from two extremes, we can look at toys at one end and burlesque shows on the other. Like with Dragnet and Highway Patrol, Desilu contracted with manufacturers in the early 1960s to create toys tied to the Untouchables. Noted a 1961 article detailing the TV-inspired toys of the holiday season, quote, "Toy makers are ardent followers of TV ratings. The sure stamp of a TV show's success is the appearance on the nation's toy counters of paper dolls, paint books, and games inspired by the program." This article then noted the moderate success of an Untouchables playset, a 1920s street scene complete with, quote, "miniature vintage cars, Tommy guns, and corpses." And that wasn't all. Advertisements from the day list things like an Untouchables mechanical target game and a battery-powered Tommy gun, both manufactured by the Lewis Marks Toy Company. On the other end of the spectrum, at least one burlesque show drew inspiration from the Untouchables: San Francisco's Eliot Ness, the Untouchable, and her twin, which promised a parade of strip stars not available on TV. We can also see the commercial success of the Untouchables in the Stardom of Robert Stack, which achieved something of an atmospheric height in this period. In 1963, he traveled to Washington, D.C., where he met Gordon Cooper, one of the original astronauts of Project Mercury. Cooper turned out to be the starstruck one of the pair, awarding the TV actor a Mercury pin and an honorary membership in the program, and they exchanged autographs. The Untouchables also evidenced commercial success in another way: imitation by its competitors. Like with Dragnet prompting a bevy of clones in the mid-1950s, so the success of the Untouchables prompted other networks and production companies to compete. Instead of continuing with period-set gangster shows, however, these programs tended to stick to contemporary times. It was honestly just cheaper, albeit with a continued focus on fighting organized crime. NBC came out with Kane's 100 and the 87th Precinct. CBS had The Investigators. ABC added Target, The Corruptors, to their own lineup. Trends, 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 wrote one frustrated critic in late 1961. If you can write to a trend, there's a hook for your hat in Hollywood. If you can't, scram. Happily then, the public lust for gangsters and crime did not last nearly as long as its desire for westerns, so that by the mid-1960s the gangster craze, along with the Untouchables and its various clones, were all but played out. In fact, the genre of the police procedural itself took an uncharacteristic nosedive in popularity, all but disappearing from the roster of in-production network shows by the middle of the 1960s. As far as its ideological messaging around cops and criminality, The Untouchables tended towards a relatively simple message. Criminals had, at least by the 1930s, developed their individual methods into a kind of organized violence. To meet the threat of these clandestine institutions, civilized society required the services of men willing to dedicate themselves to a violent and organized counterattack. Now, to the charge of hypocrisy, I am reminded, oddly enough, of a famous speech by the French revolutionary leader Robespierre. Defending the use of terror and violence by the nascent French Republic, this lawyer-turned-statesman asked a very important question. Quote, "It has been said that terror was the mainspring of despotic government. Does your government, then, resemble a despotism? Yes, as the sword which glitters in the hands of liberty's heroes resembles the one with which tyranny's lackeys are armed. Let the despot govern his brutalized subjects by terror. He's right to do this, as a despot. Subdue liberty's enemies by terror, and you will be right, as founders of the Republic. The government of the Revolution is the despotism of liberty against tyranny. Is force made only to protect crime? And is it not to strike the heads of the proud that lightning is destined?" Now, Eliot Ness would no doubt have been horrified to find himself in the company of political radicals like Robespierre. Nevertheless, the logic is the same. Why not use force, use violence, to defend the innocent and the virtuous against the ravages of larceny and caprice? Yet, as the show's critics were quick to point out, the way The Untouchables depicted this crusade against evil had the potential to elicit a different response from viewers. Recall that the show had two main draws, its villains and its violence. In order to be dramatically interesting, the show's writers often crafted their antagonists to be intelligent, determined, terrifying, in a word, compelling. Compared to Robert Stack and his fellow knight-errants, these villains, with all of their quirks and brazenness, seemed not just menacing, but cool as well. Even if this was not the intention of the writers, viewers could still come away from an episode with fond memories of Frank Needy or his co-conspirators. This tension between what the show intended, holding up righteous do-gooders against the evil they needed to fight, and the necessities of good drama, making the characters interesting and the action riveting, was not unique to The Untouchables, nor indeed to the genre of the police procedural. It's something that all creatives have to keep in mind, ensuring that their intended messaging isn't undermined by the requirements of effective storytelling or the pressures of commercial reality. The best creative minds are those that tell the story they meant to, within dramatic structures of their chosen medium, and through the industrial processes established in their particular sector of the economy. There's a ton more that could be said about The Untouchables, from how it revitalized the legacy of Eliot Ness himself, to how it's been revived every few decades for another crack at the pop cultural zeitgeist. But we need to keep moving with Quinn Martin. The new year, therefore, will start with his next project, a competitor to Eliot Ness called The New Breed. Thanks for listening to this week's episode covering the legacy of The Untouchables. Sources are in the show notes below. You can find an essay version of this script complete with detailed citations on my Substack, substack.com/OwenSimes. You can also find me on Blue Sky, Owen-Simes, YouTube, Integral History, and you can check out my book, He Was Our Man in Washington, A History of the Obama Years. Music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio.